I was going to tell you, my son Ryan, he went to Marshall University's basketball camp this past week, and my son, he's never played organized basketball, and honestly, like, leading up to it, about a month or so into it, we had to teach him how to dribble a basketball because he didn't even know how to do that. My mom actually bribed him, I think, for every day that he practices dribbling, he got $1 or something. So I think he ended up with like $20. So that's a way to help get him to learn. But he only learned to dribble by leading up to going to this camp, and he came home telling Megan just how much fun it was and how excited he was to learn basketball. But on the last day of the camp, they had an award ceremony, and Ryan didn't get an award. And I thought, in this day and age of participation trophies, you're telling me that Marshall University couldn't print off a certificate to say, hey, you completed this camp. And so, I thought he was going to be pretty bummed about it, but he handled it pretty well and about not getting an award. But when I got home from work that night, I sat down and talked to him and just told him how proud I was of him, of learning some new basketball skills and doing something that he hasn't really done before, and just tried to really encourage him. And I wanted to make sure that he was okay with something that I thought was going to be a disappointment for him. And that made me think, as parents, we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of effort about reinforcing with our kids about their self-worth. We try to tell them that they're talented, they're valuable, that they're strong enough, that they're smart enough, and that people like them. And, I'm sitting there doing that with my child, and it got me to thinking that that's exactly the opposite of what the gospel tells us. The gospel tells us that we're weak, that we're sinners, that we're lost, and we need to find our strength in God. We need to find our Savior in Jesus, and it's in Him we can find what it is that we can't find on our own. So my prayer for my kids is not that they are strong in themselves, but that they are strong in the Lord. But if we rely on ourselves, we don't really need God, do we? We have it under control. Like, if we can handle things on our own, we have it under control. Our lives are under control. This is where some of you are at. It's where I've been before. You'll come to church once a week or maybe a few times a month. But it's not really out of a need. It's out of a tradition or some ritual that you have. Remember, you have things covered in your life. You don't pray with any type of desperation. You've done a pretty good job. You've built a pretty good life resume. And you start to buy into this idea that God is nice, but He's not necessarily necessary. And that's the thing, is we need to understand that we are weak, that we don't have things under control, that we are weak, and that's okay because God is strong. And it's in our weakness that we finally begin to experience His strength. So instead of just looking in the mirror and telling ourselves that we are good enough, instead of coming to church and hearing a message that says, you have what it takes, instead what we ought to do is acknowledge our weakness, that our need is for Jesus, and our need is for the strength of the Lord. And we're going to do that today in our Heroes of Faith series, and we're going to do that by looking at the story of Samson. Samson was created to be a superhero. But he ends up being the prototypical anti-hero. An anti-hero is someone that has a character flaw or a weakness that is traditionally associated with the villain in the story. And let me tell you, America loves their anti-heroes. It kind of started off with the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy that took a darker tone than any superhero film before it. And then it went on with Deadpool being the #1 R-rated superhero movie of all time. And if you don't know much about Deadpool, he is probably one of the worst superheroes morally in all of the comic book world. And spoiler alert for a movie that's several years old, so if you don't want to hear this, just earmuff it. But Superman, in his last movie, he's known for his pure heart and his pure motives. He ends up killing the main villain by snapping his neck. That's not normal in the tradition of Superman in the comic books. And so for him to do that is just showing you that they're trying to get superheroes to have this association with the anti-hero qualities. And then there's also a movie called Suicide Squad, which did well at the box office, which is literally a group of villains that go after a bigger villain. And that tells me that America is in love with their anti-heroes. And Samson has to be one of the biggest anti-heroes in the Bible. He didn't start off that way. Like I said, he was supposed to be the Superman for the Israelites. He was given the Nazirite vow to be set apart from birth in order to not blend in with the Philistine culture and to lead the Israelites out of oppression. Samson was a man of great physical strength, but he was also a man of great weakness. And even with his weakness and struggles, God was still able to begin the deliverance of his people through Samson and his flaws. So let's take a look at the story of Samson. Just open your Bibles, or if you have an app, open that to Judges 13. And it says, "Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. A significant word in this verse is again. This word tells us about the cycle that happens over and over again in the Old Testament, where the children of God stop acting like the children of God. They give in to their weaknesses and make it clear to God that He's not important to them anymore, that He's not needed anymore, that they are doing okay on their own. So God says, all right, you don't need me? I'll just step out of the way. And so the Israelites end up in slavery, this time to the Philistine nation. And this constant cycle happens again and again. But with this particular story, it's a little bit different. The cycle usually goes something like this. The Israelites have sin, and then there's idolatry, and then they get enslaved. And then they experience the pain and consequences of that. And then they repent, they show repentance, and they cry out to God to deliver them, and God delivers them. But like I said, this time is different. This time God moves to deliver them before they ask Him to, before they cry out in repentance. And here's why. The Philistines approached conquering a nation differently. Yes, they would go into battle if necessary, but their main approach was through assimilation. They did this through intermarriage and cultural inundation. They would erase the distinctiveness of a nation by essentially, if I can use a church term, by discipling them in their ways and in their customs, so that after a generation or two, you couldn't really tell who was who anymore. You wouldn't be able to recognize God's people from them. They lost their distinctiveness. They began to blend in over time, so God moves to deliver them before they forget who they are. So given our culture today in America, if God's people would have been abused, they would have cried out. But because it was comfortable, because this was a slow process, a slow fade, they didn't even realize it was happening. Do you think maybe that's the enemy's approach with us today? As Christians, we have a lot of freedoms. We have a lot to be thankful for. It's very comfortable. Is it possible that we've allowed ourselves or are allowing ourselves to be discipled, to be assimilated? We have to be careful to keep our distinctiveness. And so God goes to rescue them before they forget who they are. Enter the hero Samson. Samson is supposed to be set apart from birth. They do this through the Nazirite vow. Nazirite means set apart. So here's the commitments of the Nazirite vow. He's not supposed to have any wine or grapes, or don't be around anything that pertains to the fruit of the vine. No association with death, and no cutting of the hair. The idea was that God's people were with the Philistines, so Samson would be set apart, not influenced by their culture, so he could lead the people in this distinct life as children of God. So Samson was a man of great physical strength, but he was also a man of weaknesses. And his weaknesses are the same as my weaknesses and probably the weaknesses of everyone in this room. And to some degree, probably the weaknesses and struggles of every person who has ever lived. So let's look at chapter 14, verse 1. It says, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. He sees this young lady and he makes plans to marry her. A Philistine woman, remember, the Philistines' way to assimilate was through intermarriage. Samson ignores God's commands. He ignores his parents' warnings. He does things his way. Samson goes through with the wedding arrangements. But while in Timnah, we see that Samson was walking through a vineyard, which is a breaking of the Nazirite vow. And then it says that he killed a lion with his bare hands. He killed a lion with his bare hands. That's pretty impressive, right? But look at the end of verse 6. It says, but he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. He didn't tell his parents that he had broken his commitment. Hey, trust me, if I killed a lion with my bare hands, you all would see this tweet immediately afterwards. I would tweet about it. You all would hear about it all the time. If you post a cat video to Facebook, I would probably comment on it and be like, hey, that cat reminds me of like a miniature version of the lion I killed with my bare hands. I only preach a few times a year, but trust me, it would be an illustration in every time I preached. You all would get tired of it quickly, but I'm telling you, I'd tell it every time I had a chance to tell it. But anyways, so he's on his way back through the vineyard. The carcass of this lion now has a honeycomb in it. He ends up using his hand to scoop up some honey and eating the honey from the lion carcass. But again, he doesn't tell his parents about, or anyone else about this. And you know why? Because again, it's a breaking of his vow. It's because it's a compromise of his commitment to God. He's compromising the vow he made. He wasn't supposed to touch a corpse. He wasn't supposed to be in a vineyard. What we are seeing from Samson is a strong man who is different when no one else is around. He puts on a facade of strength, but when no one is watching and in the little things, compromise has begun to set in. Look at verse 10. Samson's having his bachelor party. It's a 7-day feast leading up to the wedding ceremony. The word used for this feast literally means drinking alcohol, which is again a breaking of this vow. What we are seeing is instead of delivering, Samson is joining in. Verse 11, day 1 of this 7-day feast, he gives his 30 groomsmen. Mom, aren't you glad I didn't have 30 groomsmen in my wedding party, so you'd have to pay for all of them at the rehearsal dinner? 30 groomsmen. He gave them a challenge. You can see this riddle in verse 14. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. The groomsmen couldn't figure it out. And so they go to his soon-to-be wife, and in verse 15 they say, coax your husband. The word coax here means to seduce. It actually means to seduce this simple-minded person. It's the same word we see used later in Samson's life when he's with Delilah. But Samson gives in to a soon-to-be wife and gives her the answer. So then she, in turn, gives the groomsmen the answer. And so they answer the riddle correctly. And in verse 19, we see that Samson pays off his debt. His debt was to provide an outfit for all 30 of these people, all 30 of his groomsmen. So he goes and finds 30 Philistines, and he pays off the groomsmen by going and killing 30 Philistines and giving their clothing to the groomsmen. That's how he pays up. That's how he makes things even. Do you see the pride here? Samson was humiliated by them answering this riddle, and he's not going to let anyone treat him this way and get away with it. So the wedding day comes, and you know what he does? He leaves her at the altar. He leaves the bride. So now the bride's father is humiliated, and he has his daughter marry Samson's best man. I mean, I'm sure his thought process was, well, it's already paid for. Everyone's already here. I mean, you're marrying someone today. So she married Samson's best man. And now Samson isn't happy and vows revenge. In chapter 15, we see that he wants his wife back, but her dad tells Samson to stay away. Samson swears revenge on the Philistines because of this. I challenge you to read Samson's story. You'll be waiting for Samson to become someone like William Wallace from the movie Braveheart. You'll be waiting on him to fulfill his destiny. You'll be waiting on him to lead his people into battle to overcome the Philistines. When is he ever going to step up? He never does. Maybe you know someone like that. You see the potential and you know that God will use them, but they never fulfill their destiny. Maybe you are someone like that. I know I was someone like that. I knew my junior year of high school that God's plan for me was to go into ministry, but I fought it. I had my own plans. I was going to go to college for broadcast journalism and then end up being a sports center anchor. I know what some of you all are thinking. The guy that fumbles through the church announcements thought he was going to be on ESPN. That's fair. But I should have been more self-aware as a teen. I see that now. But that was my plan. And I ran from my destiny. I pursued my plan. I didn't want the plan God had for me. But even after deciding to follow God's plan, my first few years of ministry was terrible. I'm surprised I had any impact on those students because I was okay with God's plan as long as we could do things my way. It took a while for me to realize that my strength wasn't enough. So I changed course, relied on His strength, stepped up, and now I'm fulfilling God's plan. And it's obvious to me that it's God's strength. I can remember being at middle school camp 4 years ago, and I was in charge of that week camp, so most of my energy is put into focusing on the whole of camp. And then I realized, oh yeah, I signed myself up to speak one night. And I thought, well, I'll just work on it while I'm out there at camp. But I remember speaking to the campers and walking off the stage going, God, why did you have me speak tonight? I messed up more than half of what I prepared. And then the response song begins, and 20 campers come forward to be baptized. I can tell you it wasn't because of my words. It was because of God. Earlier this year I met someone, and he says, wait, are you that guy? Are you that guy that built those sheds in Elkview? I heard you built like 100 of those things. It was really hard, but I corrected him on the total. We only did 20, I think. But my thought was, to be the guy that is known for building sheds when I can barely use a hammer, that has to be God at work. And that has to, not only me relying on Him, but you all as well, allowing Him to use you like He did last year. But listen, there are people in your life that are just waiting. They are waiting for you to fulfill your destiny. They are waiting for you to be the child of God they know you can be. Waiting for you to make a difference in your world. They're waiting for you to be the spouse they know you can be. They're waiting for you to be the parent you need to be, the friend you need to be, the small group leader you need to be, the tither you need to be. They're waiting for you to be the children's ministry teacher you need to be, the volunteer at the nursing home you need to be, the little league coach you need to be. People are waiting for you to fulfill God's plan for you. But there are still people that haven't stepped up, and that's Samson's story. He has been blessed by God. He has been given every opportunity to change the world for the better, but he doesn't because he's caught up in his own world of seeking revenge and evening the score. So in seeking revenge, he ends up capturing 300 foxes. That's got to be tough. I mean, how do you find 300 foxes to begin with? I've seen like one in my life. So he captures 300 foxes, and then he ties them in pairs by their tails. I don't know if foxes are anything like cats, but if you put cats together like that, they go wild. So I assume the same thing is true of foxes. So this has got to be a tough task for him. But then he puts torches on their tails and sends them through the Philistine fields, burning up their harvest. You see, even in this, he's not prayerfully seeking God's plan at all. He's out for himself. But you know what God is doing? God is still at work. God is still at work. Even though Samson has no desire to fulfill God's plan, with this one act, Samson was able to knock out a significant economic base for the Philistines, which is beneficial in delivering the Israelites from their oppression. So Samson continues down this path of revenge and violence. It gets to the point that his own people turn him over to the Philistines, and we see that he gets a jawbone of a donkey and kills 1,000 Philistines with it. And after this, so they turn him over, but then after this, he ends up leading the Israelites for 20 years. Scripture isn't clear on how that 20 years went, but chapter 16 doesn't give us much reason to be optimistic. Look at verse 1. It says, one day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. Here he is 20 years later, but yet his struggle is just the same. And then we hear about his relationship with Delilah. If you're at all familiar with the story of Samson, this is probably the part you know the most. What's interesting to me is while Samson is known for strength, Delilah's name means weakness. It means to bring low. So imagine this exchange. Hey, I'm Samson. I'm the strongest man in the world. Hey, I'm weakness. Would have been a red flag in my dating handbook, but Samson was oblivious to it. In verse 4, it says he fell in love with her. In verse 5, it says Delilah was offered 1,100 shekels, which by today's standard is $15 million, to find the source of Samson's strength. And eventually he tells her. For a while he doesn't, but each time she asks, he gets closer and closer to telling her. Look at verse 15. It says, then she said to him, how can you say, I love you, when you won't confide in me? And then 16, it says, with such nagging she prodded him day after day after day after day. That's not, I added a few there. But day after day until he was tired to death. So here's a guy who kills 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone, but he's no match for a woman's nagging. Wives, remember that. It's like it's too much. No man can withstand it. But here's what I want you to catch, though. What is the one thing that Samson is missing from his life that would have made all the difference in his life? If he would have listened to his parents when they said, why don't you marry a nice Israelite woman, a daughter of God? Think about the difference a godly wife would have made in this man's life. To have a spiritual encourager helping him along the way. To have a helpmate helping him with his commitment to God. But instead, he had women in his life that were pulling him in the opposite direction. And so Samson tells her the source of his strength. And when he falls asleep, she has his hair cut off. And then in verse 19, it says, his strength left him. It's an interesting way of wording this because it suggests that the strength was not his. It doesn't say it's just no longer there. It says it left him. So it makes it seem like it's even more a gift from God. And so his strength that he always had taken for granted had left him. And that leads us to one of the saddest verses in the Bible. Look at verse 20. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. That's how dependent he was upon himself. That's how far removed he was from his commitment to God. That's how much he relied on his own strength. He didn't even know that the Spirit of the Lord had left him. Would that be us today? Would we know right then and there that the Spirit of the Lord had left us? Would it take a few days? Would it take a few weeks? Would we ever know? Would we ever notice that it's gone? There's a lot more to the story of Samson. This is kind of where I'm going to stop today. He has a few more chances to kind of right the ship, but he never does. And his last prayer to God, asking him for, one final glimpse of strength, his prayer to God has 13 me-centered pronouns in it, which means to tell me that he still did not figure it out. He was still relying on himself. He was still not honoring his commitment to God. So that's the story of Samson. That's how he kind of becomes the anti-hero of the Bible. But I want to talk about his weaknesses real quick. The first weakness is compromise. Samson was committed to God from birth, but he chose compromise over commitment. We read at the beginning of chapter 14, Samson went down to Timnah. This is a geographical reference, but it's also, because Timnah was 4 or 5 miles south of Samson's village, but it's also, went down is also a descriptive way to talk about the decline in Samson's spiritual commitment. Similar wordplay is used a little later in the chapter when it says Samson turned aside and scooped honey from the dead lion in verses 8 and 9, which broke his Nazirite vow. So he went down and he turned aside. That's the journey that Samson was on spiritually. And what's interesting is that Samson, because of his long hair, looks like he's maintaining that Nazirite vow. On the outside, he looks like he's following God, but his heart has drifted. Samson, like most people whose lives end up a mess, He didn't get there all at once. Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great, talks about these high-power executives and how they ended up doing bad things they never would have imagined themselves doing. Here's the quote from the book. If you would have told them 10 years ahead of time, hey, let's cook the books and get rich, they would have never gone along with it. That's rarely how people get to that point. It's usually a slow fade. When you are at step A, it seems almost inconceivable to jump all the way to step Z. Step Z is something that is a total breach of your values. But if you go from step A to step B to step C and then to step D, someday you wake up and discover that you are at step Y and the move to step Z becomes that much easier. And that's the story for a lot of people. It's just a scoop of honey. It's just some innocent flirting. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the complete truth. It's just a picture on a website. It's just a small amount of cash out of that register. The next thing you know, you're at step Y. Compromise destroys Samson, and it can destroy us too, one step at a time. The next weakness is lust or jealousy. Lust was Samson's constant downfall. Here's where Samson's physical strength gets him in trouble. He thinks he's strong enough to handle his desires. Other people might destroy their lives with sexual sin, but he thinks he's too strong to fall. Real strength in this area is demonstrated by recognizing your weakness. Strong people don't say, I'm in control. Strong people say, I'm weak. This is a struggle I need to take seriously or it could wipe me out. The last weakness is pride. Another way we could say this is that Samson's weakness was strength. Think about the irony in Samson's life. His greatest weakness was his strength because his strength made him underestimate his weakness. His world revolves around himself. Samson's story is not so much a study in what amazing things he did, but it's about what amazing things he could have done. He was miraculously born. He was miraculously strong. He was miraculously unbeatable in battle, but he wasted it. That's what pride does. It limits your influence and it limits your leadership because we can't see past ourselves. Samson's strength is no match for compromise, lust, and pride. And for far too many of us, really all of us, these same weaknesses, these same flaws, these same struggles with sin can wreck our story as well. If we don't want our story to be about wasted potential, but we want it to be about the amazing thing that God does through us, let's take these challenges to overcome weakness and truly be strong. Challenge 1, strong people are faithful in the small things. Jesus talked about this and said that if we are faithful with the little, we will be given much. Your integrity with the small things, when no one else is around tells the true story of your strength, and more often than not determines the direction of your life. Challenge number 2, strong people know they are weak. People constantly get into trouble because we overestimate our strength. Paul said to flee from sexual sin or sexual immorality. He could have just easily said flee from all sin. Running away is not closely associated with strength and courage, but strong people know they are weak. Challenge 3, strong people are strong in the Lord. Samson was so disconnected from the reality that God was his strength that when God's strength left him, he didn't even realize it. Everything we are and everything we have comes from God and is for God. In Jeremiah 9:23 through 24, Jeremiah says that wise men should not boast of their wisdom, nor strong men of their strength, nor rich men of their wealth, but if that anyone wants to boast, he should boast that he knows God. So don't take pride in your diplomas or your trophies or your portfolio. The only thing that really matters is whether or not you know God. And that's going to lead us into our response time. The only thing that matters is if you know God. If you don't know God this morning, when we go to do the song here in just a few seconds, if you want to know him, come forward and talk to me or talk to Philip or just talk to someone that can help you in making that decision to know the Lord. Maybe you already are a Christian and you have some weaknesses. Maybe you haven't come to the realization that you are relying on your own strength. You're not relying on God's strength. Maybe you just need prayer to help you come to that realization of your weakness. and to help you rely on God's strength through that. You can pray right here and around this stage, or you can pray with me. Maybe it's time for you to step up and fulfill God's plan. Maybe it's time to join with this church. Call this church your home church, your church family, and get on board with what we're doing as a church. There's a lot of decisions that could be made. I'll be up here, and there'll be other people around that can pray with you as well. I'm sure the person right next to you would love to pray with you as well. So if you have a decision to make, please come forward during this song.